Hello and welcome to Saki Tech. In today's video, I will do a full comparison between the iPhone 6 and the HTC One M8. As you know, the HTC One M8 is one of the most coveted Android phones to grace the smartphone world. It has a superior build, design, and functionality. On the flip side, we have the iPhone 6, which is also a top-of-the-line product, built and designed wonderfully. There is no question, therefore, that these two are the two top contenders in the smartphone world. HTC One M8 was released in March 2014, whereas the iPhone 6 was released in September 2014. So let's dive in and compare these top contenders in full detail. Let's take a look at the build, quality, and design. So both HTC One M8 and iPhone 6 are built with artistic precision with aluminum material. Whether you hold the HTC One M8 or the iPhone 6 in your hands, you will get an immediate sensation of holding a wonderfully crafted device. Also, both devices look gorgeous from all angles, so in terms of aesthetic looks, the choice will boil down to the personal preference of the user. Doing a quick tour around the devices, you will see that at the bottom of each phone you have the charging port and the headphone jack. You only get one set of speakers on the iPhone 6, which is also at the bottom to the right of the charging port, while the M8 comes with dual front-facing speakers with boom sound. Now, both speakers produce equally high volume, but the quality of sound from the HTC One M8 is better using the onboard speakers due to the boom sound technology. Now, on the top side, you have a power button and an IR blaster on the M8 with volume keys on the right side of the device. On the iPhone 6, power and volume buttons will be found on the left and right sides. So let's move on to the screen size and resolution. So as you know, the biggest upgrade to the iPhone 6 this time around is the larger screen size of 4.7 inches, which will offer an immediate boost in the enjoyment of media content such as games and movies on that larger screen. It sports a resolution of 1334 by 750 and a screen PPI of 326. The M8, on the other hand, sports a 5-inch screen with a higher 1080p resolution with 441 PPI. Now, with the higher resolution and PPI, HTC One M8 will ultimately end up producing sharper text, images, and videos. There's no question about that. But you will need to inspect your display very carefully to experience this extra bit of sharpness, which most people won't do. It's very important to stress the point that most people won't notice any sort of difference between these two displays in their day-to-day use. Bottom line is that both screens will render equally good viewing angles, great color contrast, and brightness. Again, if you get all scientific and measure all the variables, you will find that in some cases the iPhone will score higher, and in another department the M8 will score higher. But why go to such lengths? I have both of these phones and they both look absolutely fantastic. Though we could allow the M8 to steal the win here because of the 1080p display with the higher PPI, since I was a little disappointed not to see 1080p on the iPhone 6 while the 6 Plus got one. Anyway, let's move on to the size and weight. The iPhone 6 measures 138.1 millimeters long, 67 millimeters wide, and 6.9 millimeters thick, and it only weighs 129 grams. The HTC One M8 is 146.4 millimeters long, 70.6 millimeters wide, 9.4 millimeters thick, and 160 grams in weight. The numbers say that the iPhone 6 is definitely the thinner and lighter device of the two. This, of course, is due to the fact that HTC One M8 sports a larger screen of 5 inches, but regardless, iPhone steals the win here. At the expense of a slightly smaller screen, you get an incredibly light and thin phone. Next up is the processor, memory, and storage options. So the HTC One M8 sports a quad-core Snapdragon 801 processor clocked at 2.3 GHz. with 2 GB of RAM and Adreno 330 graphics, while the iPhone 6 sports an Apple A8 dual-core chip clocked at 1.4 GHz with 1 GB of RAM and PowerVR GX 6450 graphics. On paper, it appears that the HTC One M8 is definitely faster, but I will run a processor and memory benchmark at the end of this video to measure the total processing power to see which one produces more raw horsepower. Now, as for storage, the HTC One M8 comes with 16 GB or 32 GB options with the ability to add an additional 128 GB using a micro SD card, while the iPhone 6 starts at 16 gigabytes with no storage expansion options as usual. If you want more storage, you will have to buy the costlier 64 gigs or 128 gigs iPhone 6. Having that expansion option is a definite plus on the HTC One M8, especially if you're a media hog. Alright, so let's move on to the software, which is a very important comparison category. So the iPhone 6 runs on the latest version of iOS 8, while the HTC One M8 runs on the latest version of Android KitKat, with the famous Sense UI skin running atop Android. When comparing these two phones from a software perspective, everything boils down to the difference between iOS 8 and Android. Now, I cannot go into the details because that would take forever. So what I'll do is I'll give you the two major distinctions between these two operating systems. The first one is customization. Android is known for its customization. By using live widgets and custom home screen replacements, you can tweak the looks of any Android phone to exactly how you want it. Take a look at these HTC One M8 screens that showcase the potential of customization you can achieve on this device. In contrast, iOS 8 doesn't allow for any customization at all other than changing your wallpaper. You have a static lock screen and a static home screen populated with rows of apps and folders. So when it comes to personalization and customization, Android wins hands down. The second category of distinction is the app ecosystems. Apple shines in this department. There's no question that apps that you purchase from the App Store on iOS 8 will be better designed, better optimized, and more fluid than their Android counterparts, which you purchase from Google Play Store. Also, Apple has a greater selection of well-designed games in their App Store, which might be important for smartphone gamers. So basically, if you want to personalize your device to maximum capacity, Android is better. On the other hand, if you're all about the beautifully designed apps that simply work flawlessly, you should go with iOS 8. So what are you? Are you a customization freak, or are you all about beautiful apps? Unfortunately, you cannot have both at the same time. Now, beyond those two differences, both iOS 8 and Android are fantastic operating systems, and that's why they both dominate the smartphone market. But again, it's going to be all about what you want. So let's quickly touch on the battery. There is not much to say here. Both devices offer excellent battery life overall. With a full charge, both phones will offer you a full day of medium to heavy use, but the HTC One M8 will last longer due to its bigger battery. As you know, HTC One M8 has a 2600 milliamp hour battery, whereas the iPhone has a 1810 milliamp hours battery. So that difference is going to give you probably 25% extra battery life on the HTC One M8 as opposed to the iPhone 6. Now let's talk about another important feature, the camera. iPhone 6 has an 8 megapixels rear-facing eyesight camera with phase detection autofocus, capable of recording 1080p video and slow motion video. HTC One M8 has a rear-facing 4 megapixels duo camera also capable of recording 1080p video as well as slow motion video. Now both phones are capable of recording 1080p video at 30 frame rates per second or 60 frame rates per second. However, only the iPhone 6 is capable of recording super slow motion videos at 240 frame rates per second as opposed to 120 frame rate seconds maximum on the HTC One M8. There is absolutely no question that the 8 megapixels eyesight camera on the iPhone 6 will take better pictures than the HTC One 8 4 megapixel camera. It is true that the M8 camera has large individual pixels, which result in better low-light photography, but that's only good for night shots. Shots that I took in bright daylight and averagely lit areas on the iPhone 6 outshined the M8 every single time. Now the front-facing camera is a little different story. iPhone 6 retains the measly 1.2 megapixels, whereas the M8 sports a 5 megapixels camera on the front side, so the front-facing camera on the M8 is definitely better. Regardless, front-facing cameras are usually for low-quality selfies or video conferencing, and I never really use them for either purpose. The real battle comes down to which rear camera is better, and in this instance the trophy goes to the iPhone 6 hands down. It is good enough that it can replace a modern point-and-shoot camera. So if camera is important to you guys, you have to make sure that you inspect the iPhone 6 very, very carefully. Like I said, it's a camera that can in fact replace a point and shoot camera, but I cannot say the same thing for the HTC One M8. Alright, so now let's move on to some benchmarks, and then we can move on to some concluding remarks. Alright, so as you can see, we're making sure that nothing is running in the background, and we are going to use the Geekbench 3 benchmarking tool, which will measure the performance for the processor and the memory for both of these phones. So this is a cross-platform comparison tool, so the final results that we're going to take a look at will have a lot of meaning, because we can compare two different numbers side by side and see which one has more raw power. Alright, so the Geekbench is a fast benchmarking tool, so we're just going to let this run. We're not going to fast forward. And as you can see, the iPhone is in fact done already. And there's a single core score and there's a multi-core score. The single core score measures the single core performance, just one processor. The multi-core performance compares the combined power of all the cores in a given phone. So in the iPhone, the multi-core is 2926, single core is 1634. Meanwhile, of course, the HTC One is also done. So the single core performance on the HTC One is 981. So that is because the HTC One has 4 cores, so each core has a power of 981. The multi-core score, which is a combination of all the cores working together, is 2841. So as far as the multi-cores go, we have a very similar score. The iPhone does lead in this department, and the single core performance, obviously the iPhone is far ahead. But just remember, the one core on the iPhone is equal to 2 cores on the HTC One, but when you get a combined total of the full processing power on both of these guys, you get the multi-core scores that are quite similar. But the iPhone has a slight lead on the multi-core performance and overall performance in this processor and memory benchmark. So in conclusion, there really isn't much to say. You have seen the stats, you have seen the specs, and it is up to you to make a decision on which phone you want. Now, those of you who are invested in the Apple ecosystem will want to go with Apple, and those of you guys who like Android and its customizability will go with the HTC One M8. There is no question that both phones are crafted with artistic precision and offer excellent performance overall. Obviously, there are some differences, such as the higher definition screen on the M8 and the better camera on the iPhone 6. Now, all I can tell you guys is the bigger screen on the iPhone 6 should be an incentive to give it a try over the HTC One M8, as long as you are holding back because of the older iPhones and their smaller screen sizes. On the flip side, people who were holding back on Android smartphones due to the lack of that premium feel can now go with the HTC One M8, because in fact HTC One M8 is beautifully crafted. Now, I do hope you enjoyed this video. Don't hesitate to throw your comments below, and I'll see you the next time.